The city square pulsed with life that morning, filled with the chatter of vendors, the cooing of pigeons, and the faint music of a violinist playing near a fountain. At the center, on a polished stone bench, sat the millionaire's son, his pale eyes staring into a void that never changed. He wore an immaculate suit, too stiff for his thin frame, while his father hovered nearby, glaring at passers-by who dared to look. It was supposed to be another routine outing, another display of control. But destiny had other plans. A barefoot boy approached, clutching a piece of paper smudged with black dust. The orphan hesitated at first, watching the rich child sitting so still, so distant. Around them, people hurried past, uninterested in the silent drama forming by the bench. The millionaire barked at a doctor who had joined them, demanding progress, demanding results. Yet the boy's world remained darkness, as it always had. The orphan's chest tightened. He recognized the same loneliness in those eyes, even without sight. With trembling hands, he extended the crude drawing. It was all he had, and somehow he believed it mattered. The blind boy's fingers brushed against the rough paper, smearing a bit of charcoal on his skin. His head tilted slightly, sensing texture, sensing something more. Then it happened, so faint, so impossible. A flicker, a spark, a glimmer of light danced across his visionless world. He gasped, clutching the paper tighter. Doctors rushed forward, checking machines and instruments, but none of them caused this. The crowd nearby froze, whispers breaking through the hum of the square. The father's face drained of color, his arrogance trembling at the edges. For the first time in years, the boy whispered, "I saw something." His voice cracked, fragile yet filled with awe. The orphan's wide eyes shimmered with tears, though no one seemed to notice him standing there. The father leaned forward, his jaw tightening, desperate to deny what he had heard. The doctors argued in hushed tones, disbelief consuming them, but the silence of the square grew heavier, as if every pigeon and passerby had felt the miracle. The moment stretched endlessly, impossible to explain, undeniable to witness, and here, my friends, is where this story truly begins, on a bench in a crowded square, with a blind boy and an orphan's drawing. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments, do you believe miracles can come from the most unexpected hands? Your answer may surprise even you. Now, let's step back for a moment and understand how this boy's journey of darkness truly began. Years earlier, the square would never have been part of their lives. The millionaire had sworn to shield his son from the world, surrounding him with marble walls and the most expensive specialists money could buy. When the accident happened, he believed money could reverse it, just as it fixed everything else in his life. But blindness was a door locked tight, refusing to budge no matter how much gold was poured at its hinges. And the boy inside that darkness grew silent day by day, waiting for something or someone that could reach him. The boy had once loved sketching, filling entire books with childish but joyful pictures, trees with thick green crowns, houses with crooked roofs, faces smiling. Back at him. After the accident, he could no longer see them, yet he kept the notebooks under his pillow. Sometimes he would trace the lines with his fingertips, remembering the colors in his mind. But as time passed, even memory faded. His fingers felt only dust, and his dreams turned gray. Hope drained away slowly, like sand through an hourglass. Doctors from across the world arrived at the mansion gates. Some came with promises of miracles, others with experimental machines that buzzed and blinked. The father welcomed them with money, authority, and threats, demanding answers. Yet one by one they failed. The boy's eyes remained empty, his world unlit. Anger grew inside the father, but sadness wrapped around the boy like a second skin. Even the staff whispered that no cure existed, that the house was haunted by despair. And still, the father refused to accept it. The boy never blamed his father, but he felt the weight of his disappointment. Silence became his prison, luxury his chains. He wished only for a friend, someone who could speak to him without pity. The mansion was large, but it was hollow. Servants walked quickly through its halls, afraid of their master's temper. The boy learned to keep quiet, to sit still, to expect nothing. Yet in his heart a small ember burned, waiting for the smallest spark to bring it back to life. And that spark came in the form of a stranger from the streets, a child who had nothing but a smudged drawing in his hand. Their lives collided in the square in front of witnesses who could never unsee what they saw. For the orphan, it was a desperate gesture. For the blind boy, it was the first glimpse of light after years of darkness. And for the father, it was the beginning of a war he could not win, with money, with power, or with denial. The square returned to its ordinary noise, but nothing was ordinary anymore. The boy's fingers clung to the paper as though it were holy. The orphan stepped back, swallowed by the crowd, but his heart pounded with certainty. Something had shifted forever. The father stood frozen, torn between fury and fear, unable to crush what had just happened. And so the story of the strange drawing began, echoing far beyond the city streets, toward a truth no one yet understood. The miracle in the square did not come out of nowhere. To understand it, we must return to the night when the boy's world went dark. He had been only 8 years old when the accident struck, a car crash on a rainy road, glass shattering, metal twisting. He survived, but his eyes were burned by shards of light and fire. When he woke in the hospital, the world was gone, swallowed whole. He cried for days, asking when the morning would return, but no morning came. At first, the doctors comforted him with promises. It's only temporary, they said, adjusting the machines, speaking in low voices to his father. The boy clung to their words like lifelines. But 1 month passed, then 3, then 6, and still nothing. Shadows never lifted. The father grew restless, barking orders, demanding answers, pacing like a lion in a cage. The boy listened from his bed, small and fragile, his heart breaking a little more each day. When they returned home, the mansion seemed colder than ever. Curtains were drawn, lights left on at all hours, as though brightness alone could fight blindness. The father built a medical wing within the house, filling it with beeping machines, white coats, and endless whispers. Nurses came and went, their footsteps quick and nervous. The boy sat in silence, fingers curled around the edge of his sheets. The laughter he once carried vanished, leaving only the sound of rain against the glass. He had loved sketching before the accident. His notebooks were filled with trees, animals, and the smiling faces of his parents. After he lost his sight, the sketches remained, tucked under his pillow like ghosts of a vanished life. Sometimes at night he would run his fingers along the paper, feeling the bumps of graphite and remembering the colors in his mind. But as time passed, even those memories grew dim. The pages became cold, flat, meaningless. The boy stopped asking for pencils. His father refused to give up. He brought surgeons from America, professors from Europe, healers from the East. Each arrived with hope, with new machines, with foreign languages that promised change. But one by one, they left defeated. The father signed checks with trembling hands, growing angrier each time. "There must be a way," he shouted, his voice echoing through the marble halls. The boy listened quietly, wondering if his father was fighting for him or against fate itself. The boy's mother had once been a gentle presence, but she had grown distant after the accident. Some nights he could hear her crying in another room, her sobs muffled by doors. She could not bear to see him stumble through hallways, bruising himself against golden furniture. She could not bear to see her husband's rage swallowing the family whole. Eventually, she left for long trips, and the boy's world shrank even further. He stopped asking where she went. He already knew. Loneliness became his closest companion. The mansion, though full of servants, felt like a desert. He could hear whispers about him, pitying voices, the sound of doors closing softly whenever he passed. He hated pity more than blindness. It made him feel invisible, as if he were already gone. Sometimes he would sit by the window and press his palm against the glass, imagining the sun on the other side. He dreamed of running outside, of seeing green again, but woke to darkness every time. The father's frustration turned to arrogance. He refused to accept limits, refused to admit defeat. He ordered the boy to sit tall, to never weep, to never show weakness. "You are my son," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "You will be strong." The boy obeyed, but inside his heart was breaking. He longed for comfort, not commands. He longed for someone to speak to him softly, to remind him that he was still more than his blindness. But the mansion echoed only with orders. The years passed slowly, each day indistinguishable from the next. The boy marked time not with clocks, but with sounds: the gardener's shears, the cook's footsteps, the clinking of glasses in the dining hall. Sometimes he pretended to recognize faces, smiling into the void just to feel human. But the emptiness never left. He wondered if his life would always be this way, trapped in a cage of silence and shadows, with only the memory of light to comfort him. And so, by the time he sat on that bench in the square, holding the orphan's drawing, the boy had forgotten what hope even felt like. He had accepted darkness as his permanent world. Yet the charcoal lines beneath his fingertips cracked that prison, even if only for a second. That flicker of light was not just vision returning, it was life itself whispering back. The boy did not know it yet, but the orphan had opened a door no doctor ever could. The square's miracle spread like fire through whispers, yet inside the millionaire's home, pride ruled stronger than wonder. He sat in his grand study, surrounded by shelves of unread books and golden frames. His fingers drummed angrily on the desk, as if he could beat sense into the world. To him, everything had always bent to money: politicians, companies, even doctors. But this? A barefoot orphan? It gnawed at him, like a splinter he couldn't pull out. He had built his empire on control. Employees feared his phone calls, rivals avoided his gaze, and even his household walked in silence when he passed. He'd risen from poverty himself, and he believed weakness was the disease of the poor. Now, watching his son stumble blindly, he saw shame where there should have been love. "My son will not be pitied," he muttered, as though the words themselves were armor. But even armor can crack. The father's relationship with his boy was more command than affection. Demanded strength, demanded silence, demanded obedience. Do not cry, do not bend, do not beg. These were his rules, carved as deeply as the marble pillars in the mansion. Yet the boy's blindness was something money could not crush. And each day the father's fury grew, not only at fate but at himself, though he'd never admit it. That morning in the square had shaken him. He had seen his son gasp with wonder, seen his pale eyes flicker with light. For a moment he had hoped too, but hope turned quickly to fear, fear that he, with all his power, had failed, while a child with nothing had succeeded. Pride twisted inside him like a blade. It was a trick, he told himself. It must have been, and so he chose anger over belief. The mansion at night became his battlefield. Papers sprawled across his desk, contracts unsigned, glasses of whiskey left half empty. He stared at his reflection in the window, the city lights below, mocking him. What if the world discovered this? Miracle came from the hands of a beggar? What would that say about him, the man who could buy everything except healing for his son? His reputation, his power, his pride, all felt fragile for the first time. His conversations with doctors turned harsher. "Explain it," he demanded, slamming fists on tables, but they had no answers. Some suggested psychological illusions, others spoke of anomalies. but none dared mention miracles. The father dismissed them all, pacing, his anger echoing down the halls. Servants exchanged worried glances, but no one dared to speak. His son, silent in his room, felt the storm without seeing it. Despite his fury, the father could not banish the memory of that drawing. The paper had been dirty, smudged, so unworthy of attention, and yet it had done what wealth could not. He found himself haunted by the image of his son clutching it, eyes widening with awe. He hated that image, but he could not forget it. Sometimes, late at night, he would close his own eyes and imagine what it felt like to see light again, after years of darkness. The boy sensed his father's inner war, even if no words were spoken. He heard the quick steps outside his door, the slammed doors, the muttered curses. He wished his father could see the truth, that love, not power, was what he needed. But the father could not bend, not yet. To him, bending was losing, and losing was death. He wore his arrogance like a mask, even as cracks formed beneath it. The city outside seemed to mock the mansion's silence. Children laughed in the streets, vendors shouted their prices, musicians filled the air with songs. Life thrived where money meant little. The father despised the noise, despised the city that had given his son a flicker of hope he could not buy. He looked down at the square from his limousine window, his lips curling in contempt. He vowed to sever his son from that place, no matter the cost, and yet destiny has a way of pulling threads together. The square was not finished with him. The orphan was not finished with his son, and no matter how hard the father fought, the miracle had already taken root. Pride would soon collide with innocence, arrogance with humility. And when they met again, the city itself would bear witness to the war between them. The city breathed with a rhythm the mansion could never imitate. Streets overflowed with vendors calling out prices, children chasing pigeons, and buses groaning as they turned corners. Life in the square was messy, loud, and alive. It was here that the orphan found his place, invisible yet present. He sat cross-legged on the ground, a piece of paper in his lap, a nub of charcoal staining his fingers black. While others bartered for bread, he drew. His drawings were not of the city around him. He sketched visions that came in. Dreams, rivers glowing with light, hands reaching across darkness, suns breaking through clouds. People rarely bought them. Most walked past without a glance. A few tossed coins out of pity, never looking at the boy's eyes. Yet he kept drawing, as if the images demanded to be born. His art was the only voice he had, the only way to tell the world he existed. At night, the square changed. Vendors packed their carts, musicians folded away instruments, and silence replaced the noise. The orphan stayed behind, curled under a fountain stone edge, using his own drawings as a pillow. Sometimes the sound of laughter from families passing by pierced his chest like a blade. He envied them, but he never hated them. Hatred felt heavy. Hope, though fragile, was lighter. So he chose hope, line after line, smudge after smudge. He had no memory of his parents. The city was his only guardian, its cold pavement his cradle. Some said his mother had died giving birth, others that his father had disappeared into prison. He never knew which story was true, nor did it matter. What mattered was survival. Finding food, finding shelter, and protecting the small bundle of drawings that was his only treasure. He held them close, even when his stomach ached with hunger. Despite his suffering, the orphan carried an odd peace. He laughed at pigeons stealing crumbs, smiled at clouds shaped like ships, and whistled tunes no one taught him. He was poor, but not bitter. His art gave him purpose, and his visions gave him faith. When he sketched, he felt less alone. as though someone unseen guided his hand. Sometimes he woke from dreams with his fingers already moving, charcoal tracing light before he opened his eyes. The square itself became his studio. The fountain's murmur, the echo of church bells, the rhythm of street performers, all were part of his canvas. He didn't need walls. He had stone benches, scraps of cardboard, and the ground itself. Passers-by saw only a beggar child, but to him the square was alive with stories. He belonged here, in the noise, in the mess, in the heartbeat of the city, and soon his drawings would no longer go unnoticed. When he first saw the millionaire's son, he didn't understand who he was, just a pale boy in perfect clothes, sitting too still on a bench. He looked out of place like a statue left among pigeons. But when the orphan looked closer, he saw something he recognized: loneliness. It was the same emptiness he carried inside, though the other boy had everything money could buy. That connection, silent but undeniable, sparked something in him. He felt pulled, as though fate had placed them there together. He had been afraid to approach. The father's presence was intimidating, a shadow stretching across the square. The suits, the doctors, the expensive car nearby, all screamed danger to a street child like him, but his fingers had tightened around the drawing in his hand. A dream had guided it, a dream of light breaking through darkness. He didn't know why, but he believed it belonged to the boy on the bench. So he walked forward, heart racing. After that day, the orphan returned to the square with new urgency. He sat in his usual corner, sketching furiously, waiting to see the pale boy again. His drawings shifted, less about rivers and skies, more about faces and hands. He couldn't explain it, but he felt his art changing, growing heavier with meaning. The city carried on, oblivious, but the orphan knew something had begun. Something bigger than hunger, bigger than survival. And in the noise of the city, destiny was quietly at work. The square that had been his shelter, his stage, and his prison was now becoming something else entirely, a place of miracles. The boy didn't yet understand what role he was meant to play, but he felt it deep inside. Every line of charcoal was leading him closer. And soon, the square would no longer hold just whispers of life. It would hold the impossible. The millionaire's son could not stop thinking about the strange spark he had felt in the square. Days passed, yet the sensation lingered. The warmth of paper, the sudden flicker of light. Against his father's orders, he begged to return. It was nothing, the father growled, but the boy's insistence grew louder. Finally, with a scowl, the man agreed, hoping to prove it was just imagination. And so they returned to the place where the miracle had begun. The square bustled as always, vendors shouting prices, pigeons scattering in bursts, children running with balloons. The boy sat on the same stone bench, his father nearby, watching with suspicion. This time, he kept his head raised, listening carefully to the noises around him. Somewhere in the crowd, he hoped to hear those soft, hurried footsteps again. His heart beat faster than it had in years. He was waiting for the boy who had given him light. The orphan had not forgotten either. He had spent every day in the square, sketching with trembling hands, wondering if he would ever see the blind boy again. When he spotted the polished shoes and stiff suit from afar, his breath caught. He clutched his drawings tight, his palms black with charcoal dust. Fear whispered that he should run, but hope pushed him forward, step by step. He would not waste this chance. The blind boy heard it then, the light shuffle of bare feet on cobblestone. He turned his head, smiling faintly, sensing what others could not. "Who's there?" he asked, voice cautious but eager. The orphan froze, startled by the question, then whispered, "It's me, the boy with the drawing." Their voices met before their faces ever did. And in that fragile moment, The silence between them turned into a bridge. The father noticed the exchange and frowned, but his attention was pulled by a doctor asking questions. The orphan seized the chance. Crouching near the bench, he held up another drawing, this one of a rising sun. "It's beautiful," he whispered, though he knew the boy could not see. The blind child reached out, fingertips brushing the rough paper. He smiled, not because of sight, but because of the voice describing what he could not see. For once, words became color. The orphan spoke softly, describing the rays stretching across the page, the shadows retreating. The blind boy closed his eyes, picturing it with startling clarity. He had forgotten what the sun looked like, but now, in his mind, it returned. The warmth in the orphan's words painted more vividly than memory. Around them, the noise of the square faded, as though the city itself had gone silent to listen. Two boys, one with sight, one without, sharing a world invisible to others. The boy's laughter surprised even him. It spilled out, raw and unpracticed, breaking years of silence. The orphan grinned, though tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. To him it felt like giving away a piece of his soul, only to find it was received with joy. He wanted to keep talking, to keep drawing, to keep feeding this fragile light. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not by the world, but by someone who couldn't see at all. But shadows were never far away. A servant in uniform spotted them and began walking briskly toward the bench. The orphan stiffened, knowing he could be thrown out at any moment. He shoved the drawing quickly into the blind boy's hands. "Keep it," he whispered. "It's yours." The boy clutched it tightly, heart pounding. He wanted to ask more questions, to know who this stranger was. But the moment was already slipping away. The servant barked at the orphan to leave, waving him off like a pest. Fear rushed through him, but before disappearing into the crowd, he turned back. The blind boy's pale eyes were fixed in his direction, unseeing yet reaching. Their connection had been brief, fragile, but unbreakable. In that fleeting instant, they both understood. They would find each other again, no matter the obstacles. The square had bound them together. As the father returned, scolding his son for wasting time, the boy stayed quiet. He held the drawing against his chest, as if guarding a secret treasure. The orphan vanished into the river of people, but his presence lingered in the boy's mind. Something had shifted, something irreversible. It was no longer about doctors, or money, or blindness. It was about two boys who had found each other in the chaos of the city. And destiny was only just beginning to write their story. The square became their meeting place, a secret sanctuary hidden in plain sight. Beneath the shade of a great oak tree, where pigeons gathered and vendors shouted nearby, two boys from opposite worlds found each other. The blind boy came escorted by servants, but when his father was distracted, he drifted toward the familiar footsteps of the orphan. No one noticed the quiet miracle blooming there, except the boys themselves. Their friendship was born between echoes of laughter and the scratching of charcoal on paper. The orphan began describing his drawings in detail, turning paper into windows of imagination. "This one is a river," he said softly. "The water shines like glass, and birds fly above it." The blind boy closed his eyes, smiling as if he could see it clearly. His mind painted colors he had forgotten, blues, greens, the golden glow of sun. Each word became a brushstroke. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not trapped in darkness, but swimming in visions. Sometimes the orphan would press the boy's fingertips to the page, letting him feel the ridges of charcoal. The blind boy traced the lines, gasping at how the texture told its own story. "It feels like waves," he murmured. "Exactly," the orphan grinned. Together, they built worlds out of scraps of paper no one else valued. In those moments, the square was no longer noisy or crowded. It was their own private universe, and the drawings were keys to unlocking it. The blind boy's laughter began to return, timid at first, then louder, echoing across the square. Vendors glanced over, surprised to see joy where they had only seen silence before. The orphan joined in, his smile wide and unguarded. To him, the boy's laughter was a treasure greater than coins. "You make me forget I can't see," the blind boy whispered one day. The orphan shook his head. "You don't need eyes to see," he replied, and somehow the boy believed him. The details of the square became part of their secret language. The smell of roasted corn drifting through the air, the warm stone of the bench under their hands, the cool breeze carrying dust from the fountain. The orphan described it all, while the blind boy listened as though hearing poetry. "Tell me more," he urged, hungry for every sound, every scent. And the orphan never stopped telling him. The world came alive through his words. But secrets are fragile, and every meeting carried risk. The servants noticed how the boy slipped away from their watchful eyes. Whispers began, about a ragged child lingering too close, about how the air laughed when no one was around. Rumors traveled quickly to the father's ears. He grew suspicious, his pride refusing to accept that a beggar could succeed where doctors failed. Shadows of conflict stretched long across the square. Danger was approaching. Still, the boys continued to meet. The blind child clung to those hours, waiting eagerly for every visit. The orphan, too, found himself transformed, no longer just surviving, but living with purpose. They spoke of dreams, of fears, of what they wished life could be. "If I could see again," the boy said one afternoon, "the first thing I'd want to see is the sun." The orphan nodded, sketching silently. On the page, he drew two figures reaching toward light. The square itself seemed to protect them. Children's laughter masked their secrets. The ringing of church bells drowned out the servants' calls. Even the pigeons, fluttering endlessly, seemed like guardians circling overhead. Their friendship deepened under this cloak of ordinary chaos. And though the father's shadow loomed, the boys held on to every stolen moment. For them, each meeting was not just play. It was survival, it was hope, it was light breaking into darkness. The orphan began to dream differently. His visions grew sharper, brighter, filled with symbols he didn't understand. Sometimes he saw the blind boy's face, surrounded by fire, other times walking into rivers of light. He sketched them frantically, hiding the drawings in secret corners of the square. He didn't know why these dreams came to him, but he felt they mattered. And he feared what would happen when the father discovered their secret, for the father's pride was a storm waiting to break. Already his eyes burned with suspicion. Already the servants whispered of punishments to come. The boys laughed under the oak tree, but danger was closing in with every passing day. The square was no longer just their sanctuary. It was becoming a battlefield. And soon, innocence and arrogance would collide in a way neither of them could escape. The father had grown restless. Whispers from the servants told him of strange laughter, of his son sneaking away during visits to the square. Pride twisted inside him like poison. He ordered the car to be brought at once, determined to see for himself. That afternoon, the square was crowded with voices, pigeons and merchants, but what caught his eye was not the chaos. It was the sight of his son, seated beneath an oak tree, smiling, and next to him, a ragged orphan clutching a drawing. The sight froze him. His son, blind and fragile, leaning close to a beggar boy, laughing as though healed by scraps of paper. Rage surged through his veins. How dare this street child invade their world? How dare he give hope where money had failed? The father stormed across the square, his shoes striking the cobblestones like gunfire. Vendors fell silent, and the crowd parted instinctively. The boys looked up, sensing the storm. The orphan stiffened, his charcoal-stained hands trembling as the towering figure approached. He clutched the drawing tighter like a shield. The blind boy sensed the tension and whispered, "Father!" But the man did not answer. Instead, he grabbed the paper, crumpling it in his fist. "Enough of this nonsense," he roared, his voice shaking the pigeons into flight. People nearby gasped, whispers spreading like fire. The square had turned into a stage of fury. The blind boy reached out desperately. "No! That's mine!" His voice cracked, louder than anyone had heard in years. The father's face burned with humiliation. His son defending a beggar in public in front of strangers. He turned his anger on the orphan, eyes sharp as knives. "You! What trick is this? What scam are you playing?" The orphan shook his head, words caught in his throat. But silence was no defense against rage. "You will not shame me," the father spat, seizing his son's arm. The blind boy winced, but still clung to the orphan's presence. "He's my friend," he cried, voice breaking. The word friend echoed across the square, slicing through the noise like a blade. For the father it was unbearable, his son siding with a beggar over him. He yanked harder, pulling the boy away, while the crowd stared in uneasy silence. The orphan tried to follow, but a servant stepped in, shoving him back. He stumbled, nearly falling, his drawings spilling across the ground, pages scattered, some trampled by the crowd, others carried away by the wind. His heart pounded as he reached for them, hands shaking. But the father's glare pinned him down like a curse. "Stay away," the man growled, his voice low, dangerous. The words were a sentence. A wall erected between them. The blind boy twisted in his father's grip, reaching toward the orphan even as he was dragged away. "Wait! Please!" he shouted, his voice raw. Tears slipped down his face, unseen by the father, unseen by the doctors, scrambling to keep up. The orphan stood frozen, fists clenched, watching helplessly as his only friend was pulled into the polished car. The slam of the door echoed louder than any cry. In that moment, hope seemed to collapse. The square, moments before filled with laughter, now buzzed with murmurs. Vendors shook their heads, some whispering prayers, others cursing the cruelty they had witnessed. Children stared wide-eyed, clutching their parents' hands. The orphan gathered what drawings he could, holding them tight to his chest. He felt smaller than ever, swallowed by the city's indifference. Yet beneath the fear, something burned, an ember refusing to die. The father barked orders as the car sped away, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "No more distractions," he muttered. "No more beggars." To him, it was over, resolved with force, as everything always was. But his son sat silently in the back seat, tears soaking his sleeves. He didn't care about the wealth, the doctors, the endless attempts at cures. All he wanted was the boy in the square, the one person who made him feel less alone. And in the dust of the square, the orphan stood barefoot, heart racing, clutching a single surviving drawing. His hands shook, but his spirit hardened. He whispered to himself, almost like a promise, "This isn't the end." The city roared around him, indifferent, but he no longer felt invisible. Something greater than pride, greater than money, had been awakened. And the orphan knew he would find a way back. The orphan did not sleep that night. He sat beneath the fountain in the empty square, clutching his ruined drawings. Most were torn or smeared, footprints marking them like scars. But his hands refused to stay still. He picked up a piece of charcoal, his last stub, and began to draw again. His strokes were urgent, desperate, guided by something beyond him. On the page emerged an image unlike any before, light exploding through darkness. When dawn broke, the square filled with footsteps once more. Vendors shouted. Prices, pigeons scattered in clouds, and music drifted from a nearby accordion. The orphan sat silently on the bench where the miracle had first happened, his drawing folded in his lap. He waited, his stomach empty, but his resolve fierce. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, until at last a familiar black car rolled to a stop at the edge of the square. His heart leapt. Fate had returned. The millionaire emerged, stiff and cold, followed by doctors carrying cases of instruments. His son trailed behind, guided by a servant's hand. The boy's face was pale, his eyes lifeless again, though he clutched the memory of laughter like a hidden treasure. The orphan's breath caught as he watched him pass. He wanted to run forward, to call out, but fear froze his tongue. Instead, he waited for the right moment, holding the drawing tight against his chest. The doctors began their rituals, shining lights into the boy's eyes, speaking in hushed tones. The father stood nearby, arms crossed, impatient and scornful, but the boy sat silently, his hands resting uselessly on his knees. The orphan couldn't stand it. Gathering courage, he slipped from the crowd, weaving between vendors until he reached the bench. Heart-pounding, he placed the folded drawing gently beside the boy. Then he stepped back, disappearing into the mass of people. The blind boy's fingers brushed the paper, his head tilted, curiosity stirring. Slowly, he unfolded it, his hands trembling as though he sensed its weight. His fingertips traced the charcoal lines, bursts of jagged light, waves of shadow crumbling beneath it. Suddenly, a sharp breath escaped his lips. His pale eyes flickered, faint shapes forming where there had been only void. I see something, he whispered, voice cracking. The square hushed, as though the city itself was listening. The doctors rushed forward, crowding him with questions. What do you see? Describe it. Their hands waved lights, their machines beeped, their voices collided in panic. The boy ignored them, clutching the drawing tighter. It's like fire. No, like light-breaking stone, he gasped, trembling. Tears welled in his eyes, the first real tears in years. He pressed the paper against his chest as if it were alive. Around them the square erupted in murmurs of awe. The father's face hardened, fury and fear colliding. He snatched the paper from his son's hands, staring at the smudged lines as if they mocked him. "This is nothing," he roared. "Childish nonsense." But even as he said it, he could not ignore the truth in his son's eyes. The flicker, the spark, the impossible return. His pride cracked, though he would rather break the world than admit it. He crushed the drawing in his fist, but it was too late. The miracle had already begun. The orphan, hidden in the crowd, trembled as he watched. His chest burned with both triumph and terror. He had given the boy another spark of light, but at what cost? The father's rage was a storm, and storms destroyed everything in their path. Still, the boy's words echoed in his ears. I see something. That was enough. Even if he had to remain invisible, he would keep drawing. He would not stop until the darkness was broken. As the car pulled away, the boy twisted in his seat, searching for the orphan he could not see. His pale eyes glistened, still fragile, but no longer empty. Don't let them take it from me, he whispered to himself, clutching the memory of light. The father barked orders, drowning his words, but the boy held on. Inside, hope had awakened again. The square had given him something no doctor ever could, the promise that miracles were possible. And in the shadow of the fountain, the orphan watched them vanish into the distance. His hands were black with charcoal dust, his clothes torn, his stomach aching. Yet none of it mattered. The drawing had worked, the light had returned. He closed his eyes, whispering to the city itself, I'll keep going, no matter what it takes. The pigeons scattered above him, wings beating like drums. The battle for the boy's sight had only just begun. The following week, the square no longer belonged to vendors and musicians. It had been invaded by white coats, shiny equipment, and curious onlookers pressing close. Doctors set up makeshift stations on the benches, stringing wires, adjusting screens, and whispering to one another in disbelief. The millionaire stood at the center, arms crossed like a king commanding soldiers. His son sat quietly on the familiar stone bench, clutching the memory of the drawing. The square had become a clinic and a battleground. They shone flashlights into the boy's eyes, one after another, each hoping for the answer the last had missed. "Follow the light," they said, though his vision flickered like a dying candle. At times, he gasped with excitement, seeing outlines, shadows, even faint colors. At other times, darkness swallowed it all again. The doctors scribbled notes furiously, their faces a mixture of awe and confusion. None of them dared call it what it truly seemed: a miracle. Crowds gathered at the edges of the square, whispering in waves. Mothers held children closer, vendors abandoned their carts, beggars pressed against the fences. Everyone wanted to glimpse the boy with pale eyes, the one who had seen light where none should be. Some crossed themselves, others muttered in disbelief. A violinist played softly, as if the moment demanded reverence. The square buzzed not with commerce, but with faith and doubt colliding. The blind boy held the crumpled drawing close, tracing it with his fingers whenever the doctors allowed. Each touch brought flickers of vision, like sparks breaking through ash. "It's real," he whispered. "I know it's real." The doctors exchanged uneasy glances, trapped between science and mystery. Their machines blinked, their tests contradicted each other, but the boy's words carried a conviction stronger than any data. For him, the drawing was more than paper. It was life. The father grew restless, pacing like a predator. His pride burned hotter with every whisper from the crowd. "This is a circus," he muttered, glaring at the people watching. To him, this public spectacle was humiliation, not hope. He wanted answers, clean and clinical, not awe from strangers. Every glance toward his son felt like pity, and pity was poison. He clenched his fists, vowing to crush whatever force dared mock his wealth. One doctor dared to suggest that perhaps the boy's mind had unlocked something unknown. It could be psychosomatic or a form of self-healing triggered by... The father cut him off with a roar. "Nonsense! You're telling me an orphan's scribble is medicine, a child's smudge cured what billions could not." His voice thundered through the square, silencing everyone. The boy lowered his head, ashamed of his father's rage. The orphan, hidden in the crowd, felt his heart twist. The orphan wanted to shout the truth, to stand tall and say it wasn't trickery, it was real. But he knew his place. One step forward, and the guards would crush him. So he clung to the shadows, his eyes locked on the boy he had saved. Each flicker of light in those pale eyes felt like a victory, even if no one else believed. The square was filled with doubters, but he carried no doubt at all. His drawings were more powerful than any machine. The boy closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos of voices, and pressed the drawing to his chest. In the darkness of his mind, glowing patterns appeared, lines and bursts identical to the charcoal strokes. He gasped softly, as though seeing the world inside a dream. "It's there," he whispered. "I can see it." The doctors scribbled faster, baffled. The father scoffed, refusing to hear. But the boy knew the truth. He had seen light, and nothing could erase it. The square erupted in arguments, scientists debating, citizens shouting, faith colliding with pride. The father ordered the session to end, shoving doctors aside with his authority. "Enough! We will continue elsewhere," he barked, dragging his son away. But the crowd resisted, pressing closer, hungry for the miracle. The boy clung to the drawing as though it were part of him, refusing to let go. His small defiance was a spark against the storm. And as the car pulled away, the orphan remained in the shadows of the fountain, watching. His heart ached, but his resolve grew sharper. The city had seen it too, light born from his hands. They could doubt, they could mock, they could rage, But they could not erase what had happened in that square. The battle between wealth and wonder was only beginning. And the orphan knew he was not finished yet. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's insistence grew louder. He begged to return. To the square, not for doctors, not for his father's endless tests, but for the drawings. Each time his fingers brushed the charcoal lines, light stirred in the darkness of his eyes. At first, only vague outlines appeared, shadows moving, shapes shifting. Then faint colors emerged, reds and golds like whispers of fire. Hope, once dead, now flickered back to life. The orphan continued to wait in the square, his hands black with charcoal, his stomach empty. He brought new drawings each day, birds in flight, rivers flowing, suns breaking the horizon. The blind boy traced each one with trembling hands, his pale eyes widening as if catching fragments of a forgotten world. Their secret meetings were brief, stolen between the father's suspicions and the servant's watch, but each encounter fed the growing miracle. The boy laughed more often now, his joy startling everyone around him. "I can see shapes," he whispered one day, gripping the orphan's arm. "I can see the outline of your hand." Tears welled in the orphan's eyes as he nodded, though the boy could not see them clearly yet. They tested his new vision with simple things: the flutter of pigeons, the red of a balloon, the glint of coins in sunlight. Each discovery felt like rebirth. Doctors remained baffled. They returned with more machines, more lights, more questions. The father allowed their visits but grew colder with every passing day. He despised the word miracle, despised the whispers of faith spreading through the city. To him, this was a problem to be solved, a riddle to conquer. Yet no riddle had ever defied him like this. The more his son improved, the less control he felt. And that loss gnawed at him like a wound. The square became a stage of wonder. Vendors and strangers noticed the boy's changes, the way his head lifted, the way his eyes followed motion. "He sees!" People whispered, crossing themselves, pressing closer. The father ordered them back, furious at the spectacle. But the orphan's quiet smile said otherwise. He knew the truth. The boy's vision was growing, not because of wealth or science, but because of something pure, something unexplainable. Under the oak tree, the boys shared their private world. The orphan spoke of colors, describing skies as endless blue, leaves as emerald flames, sunlight as molten gold. The blind boy listened hungrily, his mind painting along with each word. Sometimes faint hues appeared in his vision, matching the descriptions. He gasped each time, clutching the orphan's hand. "I think I can see it," he whispered, and the orphan whispered back, "Then it's real." But shadows never stayed far. The father's suspicion sharpened with each new laugh, each whisper of progress. He sent guards to patrol the square, watching for the ragged child who dared influence his son. Still, the boys found ways to meet, hidden corners, quick exchanges, drawings passed hand to hand. Their friendship grew stronger with each secret, defying the walls built around them. Yet danger loomed, closer each day. The boy's vision began to show fragments of faces, at first blurred and ghostly, then sharper, though incomplete. He saw the curve of a smile, the outline of eyes, the flash of hair. "I think I saw you," he whispered to the orphan one afternoon. Orphan laughed softly, pressing another drawing into his hand. "Then remember me," he said. The boy nodded, his heart pounding. For the first time, he was seeing not just the world, but a friend. Hope was a dangerous thing in the millionaire's household. Servants whispered of the boy's progress, their words carrying to the father's ears. Pride clashed with fear inside him. If the miracle continued, it would prove him powerless. If it ended, it would prove him wrong. Either way, he felt trapped, cornered by forces he could not buy. His son's pale eyes, once symbols of failure, were now windows he could not control. And that terrified him more than blindness ever had. The orphan, meanwhile, felt a new weight pressing on him. Each drawing carried expectation, as though the boy's sight depended entirely on his hands. He worked tirelessly, smudging paper until his fingers bled, yet he never stopped. He couldn't. Each spark in the blind boy's eyes reminded him why he drew. Together they stood in defiance of the world, the beggar and the air, the charcoal and the light. And the square, alive with whispers, waited for what would come next. The millionaire sat in his study, the city lights glowing faintly through the window. His son's laughter echoed in his mind, a sound that should have been a blessing, but instead felt like a threat. Each smile, each whispered story about colors, tore at the armor he had built around his pride. He could not stand the thought that an orphan had done what doctors, scientists, and billions could not. Rage twisted into paranoia. He decided the boy had to be investigated. He summoned men he trusted, private investigators, rough voices, sharp suits. "Find him," he ordered, sliding a thick envelope of cash across the table. "I want to know everything. Where he came from, who he is, what game he's playing." The men nodded, knowing better than to question him. In his mind, there could be no miracles, only schemes. If he exposed the orphan as a fraud, he could reclaim his authority. If not, at least he could destroy him. The investigators followed the orphan through the city. They saw him sleep under the fountain, beg for scraps, steal apples when hunger was unbearable. They saw him draw by candlelight in abandoned alleys, his hands trembling from the cold. They reported back to the millionaire, laying photographs and notes across his desk. He scanned them with narrowed eyes, lips pressed thin. This was no con artist. This was a child with nothing. And that truth unsettled him more than any lie. Pride refused to let him admit it. "He's using pity," the man snapped, crumpling one of the photographs. "People will believe anything when it comes from a beggar's tears." Yet the evidence weighed heavily on him. No family, no home, no gain from trickery, only drawings, endless drawings of light. The father poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid as though it held answers. But no amount of drink could drown the truth. Money had failed. Meanwhile, the boy at the heart of it all was changing. His vision grew stronger each day, and with it his courage. He began defying his father's commands, insisting on returning to the square. "I want to see him," he said firmly. The father scolded him, barked orders, threatened punishment, but the boy's voice no longer trembled. "You can't stop me," he whispered once, and for the first time the father saw rebellion in his son's pale eyes. The city began to talk. Rumors spread through cafes and markets about the heir who could see again, thanks to a street orphan's drawings. Some called it magic, others called it madness, but all agreed it was something money couldn't explain. The millionaire hated the whispers. He felt mocked, exposed, vulnerable. Among elites, laughter followed him like shadows. They toasted his humiliation in gilded dining halls, saying wealth could not buy what a beggar had given. At night, the father prowled the mansion halls, haunted by ghosts of failure. He would stop outside his son's door, listening to faint murmurs as the boy whispered about light, about colors, about hope. His fists clenched. He wanted to rip the drawings away, burn them, erase the evidence. Yet something held him back, the fragile joy in his son's voice. Rage battled love inside him, and pride battled both. He was losing the war, though he would never admit it. The orphan, unaware of the hunt against him, continued to draw. His dreams grew sharper, guiding his hand with images he didn't understand. Sometimes he woke trembling, sketches of fire and rivers of light scattered around him. He felt chosen, but also burdened. Why him? Why this boy? Still, he refused to stop. He knew the blind child needed him, and deep down he knew the story wasn't finished. Darkness was not done yet. One evening, the investigators returned with nothing new, only more proof of poverty, loneliness, and innocence. The millionaire dismissed them angrily, slamming the door behind them. He paced the study like a trapped animal, muttering to himself, "If it isn't a trick, then what is it? If it isn't science, what am I fighting against?" For the first time in years, fear filled his chest, heavier than any loss of fortune. He was no longer in control, and so desperation began to consume him. He resolved to tighten his grip, to cut his son off from the orphan forever. No more squares, no more drawings, no more laughter. In his arrogance, he believed he could stop fate by building higher walls. But walls cannot contain light. Already his son's pale eyes carried more defiance than he had ever seen. Already, destiny was preparing the next blow, and the storm of separation was closer than he realized. The orphan's world was smaller than anyone imagined. His bed was a patch of stone beneath the fountain, his blanket a bundle of old newspapers. On colder nights, he curled against the wall of an abandoned building, clutching his drawings for warmth. Hunger gnawed at him constantly, but he had grown used to it, the ache in his stomach as familiar as breath. Yet what never dulled was loneliness. No family, no friends, until the blind boy appeared. He survived on scraps. Sometimes a kind baker tossed him stale bread. Sometimes he found half-eaten fruit in the market's trash. Coins clinked in his tin cup only rarely, and most days they weren't enough for food. But when people ignored him, he drew. On scraps of cardboard, on the backs of receipts, on walls hidden in alleys, lines of charcoal spreading light across darkness. He drew not to sell, but to survive. His art was his only companion. His visions came mostly at night. In dreams, he saw rivers glowing like fire, stars bursting across endless skies, and two figures walking hand in hand toward the sun. He woke with shaking hands, reaching for charcoal as if compelled by an unseen force. The images poured out of him, strange and urgent, impossible to ignore. He didn't understand them, but he felt they mattered. Every line was heavy with meaning he could not explain. One evening, he dreamed of the blind boy. In the vision, the boy stood alone, surrounded by shadows trying to swallow him whole. The orphan tried to reach him, but his hands passed through the darkness like smoke. He woke with a gasp, sweat chilling his skin. Desperately, he sketched what he saw, jagged lines of shadow reaching for a small figure of light. His heart pounded. He didn't know if it was warning or prophecy, but it filled him with dread. He began carrying the drawings everywhere, tucked against his chest beneath his ragged shirt. To lose them felt like losing a piece of himself. Each one was tied to the blind boy. Each one felt like a lifeline, yet the weight grew heavier every day. "Why me?" he whispered into the night sky, staring at stars through the cracks of broken rooftops. Why was I chosen for this? No answer came, only the wind rustling papers at his side. The city was merciless. Strangers brushed past him without seeing. Guards shooed him from corners. Merchants scowled when he lingered too close. To them, he was nothing but another shadow among many. But the orphan knew differently. He carried something inside him, something no one else seemed to have. His drawings could awaken light. That truth frightened him as much as it sustained him. Because if he was chosen, then he was also responsible. He thought often of the boy on the bench, the pale face, the fragile smile, the trembling voice whispering, "I see something." Those words replayed in his mind, fueling him through hunger and cold. He knew he had given the boy more than paper. He had given him hope. And now that hope depended on him alone. If the vision stopped, if the drawings failed, The boy's world would sink back into darkness. The burden pressed hard on his thin shoulders. Some nights he wanted to run, to escape the city, to leave behind the fountain, the square, and even the blind boy. It was too much for one child to carry. But whenever he tried to imagine it, his heart clenched. He could not abandon the boy who had become his only friend, his only proof that he mattered. So he stayed, and he drew, even when his fingers bled, even when exhaustion made his head spin. He refused to stop. One morning, as the city awoke, the orphan watched the first sunlight creep across the square. He held a fresh drawing in his lap, one he had finished after another restless dream. It showed a boy surrounded by flames of shadow, but reaching for a hand, pulling him into light. The orphan shivered, sensing it was more than imagination. Something was coming, something darker than before. He pressed the page close, whispering a silent prayer. And so, the burden deepened. He was not just a hungry child drawing for survival anymore. He was a vessel for something greater, something both terrifying and beautiful. Each dream left him weaker, yet more determined. Each drawing brought him closer to the blind boy, and closer to a fate neither of them yet understood. The orphan felt the weight of destiny pressing down, and in his heart he knew the storm was almost here. The father could no longer bear it. His son's laughter in the square, the whispers of miracles, the shame among his peers, it was too much. He paced his study like a caged lion, the city's glow mocking him through the windows. Finally, he made his decision. His son would leave. "Abroad," he declared, slamming his fist on the desk. "New treatments, new doctors, away from this filth." His voice echoed like a sentence. To him, it was salvation. To his son, it was exile. When the boy heard the news, his world shattered. "No," he whispered, his hands trembling. "You can't." But the father's eyes were hard, cold, unyielding. "It's final," he said, dismissing the protests like childish tantrums. For the first time, the boy raised his voice. "You don't understand. He's my friend." The words sliced the air, heavy with defiance. The father froze, stunned that his son dared challenge him. Rage flickered behind his eyes. In the square, the orphan sensed the change before words reached him. The blind boy arrived late, his steps hurried, his face pale. "He wants to take me away," he whispered, clutching a fresh drawing. The orphan's heart sank, the paper trembling in his hands. "No," he said firmly, "you can't let him." But both boys knew the father's power stretched further than the city, further than hope. Fear clung to them like smoke, but so did determination. The boy clutched the drawing tightly. "If he takes me, I'll lose everything. I'll lose you." His voice cracked, raw with terror. The orphan felt tears sting his eyes, but he forced himself to stay strong. "Even if he takes you far, I'll still be here," he said softly, "and you'll still have this." He pressed another drawing into the boy's hands, two figures standing against a wall of shadows. The blind boy held it close, as if clinging to life itself. That evening, their voices rose in the mansion. Servants froze as father and son clashed for the first time in years. "You will go," the father roared. "You will do as I say." But the boy shouted back, his voice trembling yet unbroken, "Money can't fix me. It never could." The words struck like lightning, silencing even the walls. The father stood frozen, lips trembling with fury, while the boy's chest heaved with newfound courage. The orphan watched from the shadows outside the mansion gates. He couldn't hear every word, but he felt the storm raging inside. The boy's cry carried through the walls, sharp and desperate. The orphan's fists clenched, powerless to protect his friend from within. He pressed his newest drawing to his chest, whispering, "Hold on." He didn't know if the boy could hear him, but he prayed the drawing's strength would reach him somehow. The father, humiliated, grew crueler. He ordered guards to double their watch, forbade his son from leaving the mansion, and locked away the car keys. To him, separation was the only cure, but the more he tightened his grip, the more his son resisted. The boy pressed the orphan's drawings to his chest at night, whispering to them like prayers. His vision flickered still, small sparks in the dark, but hope was alive, and hope was dangerous. The orphan began drawing feverishly, his hands blistered, his nails blackened. He sketched images of chains breaking, of suns tearing apart storm clouds, of doors thrown open to light. Each page felt urgent, desperate, as though time itself was running out. He didn't know how many drawings would be enough, but he refused to stop. His destiny, he believed, was tied to the boy's freedom. And destiny would not be silenced. In the city, rumors spread faster than fire. People whispered about the millionaire tearing his son away from the orphan. Some called it cruelty, others called it fear. Yet all agreed, something beyond wealth was at work. The square buzzed with anticipation, as if the city itself awaited the next chapter. The orphan listened to the murmurs, his chest tight. The world was watching, though no one knew what would come next. And in the mansion, the father stood by his son's locked door, fists clenched, pride crumbling. "You are my son," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. "You will obey." But deep inside, he felt the tremor of doubt. His son had spoken with a strength he had never seen, a strength not bought, not ordered, not controlled. And in that strength, the father sensed the truth he feared most. He was losing him, to the light, to the orphan, to a miracle he could never own. The boy's vision had been growing stronger each day, but suddenly it began to falter. It started with shadows, creeping back at the edges of his sight. Then colors dulled, outlines blurred, and the spark dimmed. He rubbed his eyes in panic, whispering, "No, not again." Servants rushed to him, but their voices sounded distant, muffled by his dread. By nightfall, the light was almost gone, leaving only darkness once more. Doctors flooded the mansion, filling the halls with white coats and hurried steps. They tested his eyes with lights, injections, and machines, but their faces told the truth. The miracle was slipping away. "It must have been an anomaly," one muttered, scribbling notes. "A temporary hallucination," another suggested. Their words were sharp knives cutting through the boy's fragile hope. He clutched the orphan's drawings tightly, refusing to let go. They were his only proof that it had been real. The father stood tall, his pride feeding on the collapse. "I told you," he growled, pacing the study. "It was nonsense, tricks, false hope." Yet even as he spoke, fear gnawed at him. His son's pale eyes, once flickering with light, were empty again. The boy wept, something the father had not seen in years, but instead of comforting him, he hardened his voice. "Enough tears. We leave for Europe in the morning." His tone was final, merciless. The boy screamed for the first time. "No! His voice cracked with raw pain, echoing through the halls. Servants froze in shock, never having heard him shout before. He clung to the drawings, pressing them against his chest as though they were his last breath. "He can help me!" he cried. But the father slammed the door, ordering guards to keep watch. In his arrogance he saw rebellion, not desperation, and rebellion, he believed, must be crushed. Meanwhile, the orphan felt the collapse like a storm in his chest. That night, his dreams twisted into darkness, shadows swallowing the boy whole, light struggling to break through. He woke in terror, charcoal scattering from his trembling hands. He knew, without seeing, that the boy was suffering. Desperately, he drew again, his lines jagged, frantic, desperate to stop what he felt was coming. The page showed two figures reaching across a wall of blackness. His tears stained the paper. At dawn, he ran to the mansion gates, clutching the new drawing. Guards shoved him back, their spears blocking his way. "He needs this!" The orphan cried, but they laughed, kicking dust at his feet. He tried to push forward again, but their hands threw him to the ground. His knuckles scraped the cobblestones, blood mixing with charcoal dust. Still he held the drawing high, shouting until his voice broke, but no door opened, no hand reached back. Inside, the boy pressed his face to the window, hearing faint cries beyond the walls. His heart leapt. "It's him," he whispered. But the guards dragged him away before he could press further. He collapsed onto his bed, the drawings trembling in his hands. Darkness pressed harder, thicker, until even memories of light seemed distant. His hope wavered, thinner than paper. For the first time, he wondered if the miracle had been nothing more than a dream. The father ordered the car to be prepared. "We leave tonight," he barked. The mansion erupted in activity, bags packed, tickets secured, staff rushing about. But amid the chaos, the boy sat motionless, clutching the last drawing he had received. "Don't take me," he whispered, though no one listened. His hands trembled, his eyes wet. He had fought so hard, believed so deeply, and now it was slipping away. The silence of the mansion felt heavier than chains. The orphan did not leave the gates. He waited all day through heat and hunger, through jeers from strangers and lashes from guards. His body shook, but his resolve did not. He whispered to himself, "He needs me. He needs this drawing." The city moved around him indifferent, but he remained anchored by faith. Each heartbeat told him he could not give up. Not now, not when the boy was so close to losing everything. And so, as night fell, hope seemed all but extinguished. The boy wept in his room, the orphan bled at the gates, and the father revelled in his false victory. Yet destiny was not finished. The darkness had reached its peak, but shadows always break before the dawn. And in the coming hours, a final drawing would shatter the walls built by pride and fear. The miracle was not gone. It was waiting to be reborn. Night wrapped the city in silence, broken only by the cries of pigeons roosting above the square. The orphan crouched near the fountain, his body weak, his hands trembling from hunger and wounds. Yet he held a fresh sheet of paper, its surface smeared with the last of his charcoal. His dreams had guided him again, sharper than ever. The image was clear. 2 boys, one blind and one poor, walking hand in hand toward a horizon blazing with light. He knew this was the drawing that mattered most. He could not wait for the gates to open. He could not wait for permission. With desperation burning inside him, he pressed the drawing to his chest and ran through the sleeping city. His bare feet struck the cobblestones, leaving smudges of blood and dust. Lanterns flickered as he passed, shadows stretching long across the walls. Every step whispered the same thought. This must reach him. This must save him. There was no other choice left. At the mansion, guards patrolled heavily, their armor glinting in torchlight. The orphan pressed against the wall, heart pounding, searching for a way in. His eyes landed on a narrow gap in the iron fence, just wide enough for his thin body. He squeezed through, scraping his back against metal, and dropped silently onto the gravel. Pain shot through his limbs, but he ignored it. He clutched the drawing tighter and moved toward the window where faint sobs echoed. Inside, the blind boy sat slumped on his bed, his face buried in his arms. The drawings he already owned were scattered across the sheets, their lines blurred by his tears. He whispered to them as though they were alive, begging them not to leave him. Suddenly, a soft knock against the window made him lift his head. His pale eyes widened, though they saw nothing, but his heart recognized the sound. "It's you," he breathed. The orphan tapped again, holding the paper against the glass. The boy stumbled forward, fumbling with the latch, until the window creaked open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the orphan's ragged breath. "I brought this," he whispered, voice hoarse. His hand shook as he passed the drawing through the opening. the blind. Boy clutched it carefully, as though holding fragile glass. For a moment silence filled the room, heavy with anticipation. His fingers traced the charcoal lines, two small figures side by side, reaching for light together. The texture told him more than words ever could, the rise and fall of strokes, the force pressed into every line. A shiver ran through him, then suddenly his breath caught. A spark burst inside his eyes, sharper than before. He gasped, clutching the drawing tight. I see it, he cried, his voice breaking with awe. His eyes flared with life. Light flooded his vision, first outlines, then shapes, then colors sharper than memory. The boy blinked rapidly, tears streaming down his cheeks as the world returned in pieces. He turned, and for the first time in years he saw. Standing outside the window was the orphan, thin, bruised, breathless, but real. His face was the first image the boy's eyes captured fully. Their gazes locked, one wide with shock, the other shining with tears. It was as if the world itself had stopped. The boy dropped to his knees, sobbing with joy. I see you, he whispered, voice trembling. The orphan pressed his forehead against the glass, overcome with emotion. Around them, the mansion remained asleep, unaware that a miracle was unfolding in the quiet of the night. Machines and doctors had failed. Pride and money had failed. But a simple drawing had opened the door to light. And two boys, bound by fate, stood at the threshold together. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hall. Guards approaching, drawn by the noise. The boy scrambled, holding the drawing tight against his chest. They can't take this from me, he muttered fiercely. The orphan stepped back, ready to run, but the boy shook his head. No, stay. His voice carried strength no one had ever heard before. For the first time, he wasn't just the millionaire's blind son. He was a boy. Reborn, defending the miracle with his own voice. The door burst open and the father strode in, eyes blazing. He froze at the sight before him, his son kneeling, tears streaming, his eyes glowing with unmistakable life. The drawing lay across his chest like a shield. For once the father's voice failed him. He stood in stunned silence, the impossible unfolding before his eyes. And in that silence the boy lifted his face, vision restored, and whispered the words that shattered every wall. I can see. For a long moment the room was frozen in silence. The father stared at his son, eyes wide, hands trembling at his sides. The boy's pale gaze, once empty, now burned with light. He blinked rapidly, drinking in colors, shapes, and shadows he had not seen in years. His first clear vision had been the orphan's face, but now he saw everything. The velvet curtains, the flickering candles, the father himself, paralyzed by disbelief. The impossible had become undeniable. Doctors rushed in behind the father, their instruments clattering, their mouths falling open. They shone lights, asked questions, scrambled for explanations, but none came. This isn't possible, one whispered, his voice shaking. Another pressed his stethoscope against the boy's chest as though the heartbeat could reveal the truth. But all tests were meaningless. The miracle was visible to every eye. The boy's laughter, raw and joyous, filled the room. It was the sound of life reborn. The orphan stepped hesitantly through the window, unsure if he belonged inside such grandeur. His clothes were torn, his hands black with charcoal, his face pale from hunger. Yet all eyes turned toward him, the stranger who had done what science could not. The boy reached for him instantly, grabbing his hand. "This is my friend," he said, his voice steady, his vision steady. The room gasped, the father paling at the declaration. Friend. The word rang louder than any title. For the first time in his life, the millionaire had no words. His pride, his wealth, his certainty, all shattered before the sight of his son seeing again. He dropped to his knees, his chest heaving. Slowly, his eyes lifted toward the orphan. In them there was no arrogance now, only humility. "Thank you," he whispered, voice breaking. His lips trembled as he spoke the words he had never said to anyone below him. "Thank you, boy." The orphan swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He had never been thanked by a man like this. He only shook his head, clutching the blind boy's hand tighter. "I just drew what I saw," he said softly. But those words carried power. Everyone in the room understood. This was not about money or medicine or pride. It was about something greater, something no one could claim or explain. A miracle that had chosen the humblest hands. The mansion changed that night. Where there had once been cold silence, now there was laughter, warmth, and life. Servants smiled openly, whispering prayers of thanks. Doctors stayed, not to test, but to witness. And in the center of it all, two boys sat side by side, their bond unshaken. The drawings, once crumpled and dismissed, were now treated as treasures. They were framed along the walls, not as art, but as proof that light can be born from darkness. The city heard of it quickly. By dawn, the square buzzed with rumors, then cheers. "The blind boy sees!" people cried. Vendors raised their hands, beggars crossed themselves, musicians played louder. The fountain sparkled as though touched by heaven. Crowds gathered, pointing toward the mansion, their whispers turning into songs of faith. No one cared for science or wealth. They cared only for the story that hope had returned, carried by a child of the streets. The father stepped into the square with his son at his side, now seeing the world with wide, astonished eyes. The crowd erupted, pressing closer, chanting blessings. The millionaire raised his hand, but not to command. This time, to bow his head. He placed his hand on the orphan's shoulder, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "This boy gave my son what I could not." Gasps spread through the people. For the first time, pride had bent to truth. The orphan blushed, shrinking under the weight of so many eyes. But the blind boy, now no longer blind, squeezed his hand. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. Together they stood before the crowd, living proof that miracles belong not to kings or riches, but to the simplest of hearts. Pigeons burst into the sky, their wings flashing white against the sun, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating. The city square, once ordinary, had become holy ground. And so the story closed where it began, in the heart of the city, where wealth and poverty had collided. The millionaire's son, once blind, now walked in light. The orphan, once invisible, now stood as the hand that carried a miracle. And the father, once arrogant, now bowed to the truth money could never buy. As we leave their story, I ask you, what do you believe this drawing really meant? Tell me in the comments, subscribe if you believe in light, and share this story so others may see.